say who would injure me. The world turns aside to make room for me. The world turns aside to make room for me. I come, O blazing light, the shadows must flee. I come, O blazing light, the shadows must flee. Hail, O ye ocean, divide and part.
Greetings, everyone. I don't think I've ever seen after hearing you chant, a group that's more ready to achieve their material and spiritual goals. So it's always a privilege to be part of this convocation of souls, and it's really a great joy to be here with you tonight. When I was brand new on the path, before coming in the ashram, one day I went to meditate at the Encinitas Temple. And the attendant in the book room on that afternoon was a longtime devotee, Mrs. Vickerman. Maybe many of you old-timers anyways know her. She passed away some years ago. Her husband was one of Guruji's, Paramahansa Yogananda's, first Kriya Band disciples from 1923 in New York City. And he was a wealthy owner of a carpet manufacturing company. In fact, he provided the very first carpets that went in the Mother Center. And Master called him Vicky, Warren Vickerman. Anyway, this day when I went into the book room, Mrs. Vickerman, who was really just the image of this very wealthy New York, high upper class individual, she pulled out Whispers from Eternity, and without any preamble, read out these very beautiful and powerful words. Let every beat of my heart be a new word in my endless love lyric to thee. May every sound from my lips carry secret vibrations of thy voice. Let my every thought be bliss saturated with thy presence. May every act of my will be impregnated with thy divine vitality, ornament with thy grace, my every concept, every expression, and every ambition. And then she turned to me. I had never met her before. I was the only one in the room. And she turned to me and in this tone of voice that just dared me to be so stupid as to disagree with her, and said, "That is the very definition of enthusiasm." Well, ever since then, I have had no questions about what our material and spiritual goals are. I often like to begin these talks by remembering Paramahansaji's words to those who came to his talks on the teachings, where he said, if you practice 1/1,000,000th of the things that I tell you in these meetings, you will reach God. 1/1,000,000th. And in this class, we're going to focus on one specific practice, a number of ideas, but one thing in particular that I believe will fulfill that promise. Of course, I have to earn my keep by talking for a full hour, so you'll just have to wait till we get there. But let's start by, please just join in visualize this scenario, that this happened when Paramahansaji went back to India in 1935. And during his visit, he visited in Calcutta one of the Ramakrishna order ashrams. And one of our monks actually met somebody who was there on that occasion in 1935. And this person was recalling that when Guruji entered the room, he said, all I saw was this incredible light, this incredible intense light that came in the room, and it was just exuding such joy, such powerful bliss. And there was a kirtan going on in the room, and they said for 2 hours Guruji was just lost and dancing, just over and over again repeating, Ma, Ma, Ki Jai, Divine Mother, victory to Divine Mother, Ma, Ma, Ki Jai. And when the time came to leave, he was so absorbed in that, they literally had to carry him out to the car. Now, to me, that says just about everything about achieving our material and spiritual goals. I mean, well, what more could we want? And we can have it, each one of us, by applying the techniques that we're going to touch on in this class. Where even just 3 words he was able, ma ki jai, 3 words he was able to open up that entire cosmos of love and bliss. Now you begin to see why he could say, if you practice 1/1,000,000th of what I give you, you too, all of us can reach that. One time there was a man who went into a bookstore and told the clerk that he was looking for a gift, a book. He wanted to buy a book for a friend who was in the hospital and was very sick. And the woman behind the counter very sympathetically asked him, well, would you like me to recommend a religious book? And he right away said, oh no, he's not that bad off. Well, here in SRF, we do have some religious books, but we call them how to live books. Master introduced this concept of the art of living. And he often said people need to learn this art of how to live. And you can imagine back when he began to introduce this, people would say, and probably many people today have the same attitude, well, I know how to live. I can take care of myself. I have a good job, and my family eats 3 good meals a day, and I'm able to buy my children all the latest clothes when they go back to school. And we even went on a vacation in Hawaii this year. A retreat in Hawaii this year. I know how to live. Well, really? That's also what Job thought. That story of Job in the Old Testament, it's one of the great and most powerful success stories in world literature. And you probably know it. Actually, it's not a rags to riches, it's more riches to rags, and then back to riches. Because Job had it all. He had property, he had family, he had good health, he was very well respected in his community. And then one by one, you know the story, I won't go into the details because it's not important for this, but he lost it all. And the story begins where he is really whining to God. Whining is the only word you have for it. He was basically, why me? It probably sounds familiar to a lot of us. Why to God? Why did you take everything away? I've done everything right. Why did you make this world so unfair? It's just not fair, with so much suffering and pain and heartache. Well, God wanted to get Job out of that victim consciousness, really to learn what our Sri Gyanamata said, put into words when she said, difficulties develop steel in the muscles of our soul. And then she said, without them, we would develop into a sort of spiritual cream puff. Good, perhaps, but not for much. So this is what the Lord was conveying to Job in response to his "it's not fair" and "why me" questions. And the story tells us the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. So I can't do a whirlwind voice, but you'll have to just use your imagination and feel the energy and the power that came from that whirlwind. And he first said to Job, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" In other words, who is this totally clueless idiot who wants to tell me how to do my job? Well, the King James Version is much classier, but actually our president, Mrinalini Mata, put that question, very similar question, to Master one time. And it's amazing how similar the response was. She was saying to him, this was during a time that Guruji had taken on a lot of karma of devotees and working it out on his own body. He was going through a period of tremendous physical suffering. And she, of course, was distraught, as were all the disciples who served him, who were around him. And one day she just burst out and she said, "But Master, it's so unfair. Why does Divine Mother allow this?" And she said, "Well, I thought he would, respond with thanks for your sympathy, or he would give me some gentle discourse of wisdom about why things are set up that way." He didn't. She said, he looked at me and with very stern voice said, "First become Divine Mother, then you can criticize her." And he said, when you will become Divine Mother, you will do exactly as she does. So this is really what the Lord was saying to Job. He went on and said, "Stand up now like a man, because I demand of thee, I want answers." He said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if you're so wise. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Whereupon are its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy?" What an electrifying passage. Just imagine how different our lives would be if in every situation we had that consciousness where we could see it and appreciate it as the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy. As a Christian mystic who had that same perception said, "Praise for everything, praise for it all." Now, this is literally incomprehensible to us in normal consciousness. Literally. To say that all the chaos, all the pain, all the heartache, all the suffering, that it's really okay, let alone a cause to shout for joy. Any normal person would say, this is crazy, that's delusional. Well, that so-called normal person is one whose nervous system is so noisy that it completely drowns out that divine song of creation. Without sadhana, the nervous system is a very noisy place and very confusing place. In fact, yoga teaches us that all of our pain, all of our confusion, all of our suffering come from the noise or the static, you might say, that our untuned nervous systems introduce into the divine song of creation. All of it. I think all of you know this word sadhana. It means the spiritual discipline, the path of spiritual practice that we follow in daily life, meditation and the spiritual attitudes, spiritual disciplines that we commit ourselves to. And I like to think of that. I like to think of this whole process of sadhana in a very practical way, that we can think of it means getting the nervous system back in tune, tuning the nervous system. Master said, we can convert ourselves, our matter-of-fact, workaday life, to vibrate with the song of the infinite. Spiritualize yourself so the divine melody will flow through your life, no matter what your outer activities. Spiritualize yourself, meaning become the Spirit. That's sadhana. Guruji, as you probably know from reading his things, he loved interesting words. And he used to play with them. He had a lot of fun with them. And he used them in a masterful way to convey deep and powerful and motivating spiritual truths. And here's one that relates to our subject. This is from the very last chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi. Apotheosis. Apotheosis. It comes from the word theos, meaning God. It literally means elevation to divine status or deification. So the way he uses it in that last chapter of the autobiography, he says, life after life, each person progresses at his own pace, be it ever so erratic, toward the goal of his own apotheosis. Now, what a statement. What a statement. It not only defines what our goal is, that realization of our divinity, of our innate divinity, but it says that in the end we will achieve it. We will achieve it, no matter how erratic we are along the way. Isn't that something that we can hold on to for encouragement? I know it is for me. In other words, literally, we cannot lose, even if sometimes it seems like we are. There was a devotee at one of our temples who was very inspired by Master's teachings on success and will and achieving our goals and affirmation and so on. And this person's business was really not doing very well. And so she decided, well, I really have to get to work with these principles of affirmation, goal setting, visualizing success. And she said, she told herself that she was going to set a benchmark. She would make so much money that she would be able to buy a brand new Cadillac. And she affirmed this dream car was sitting in her driveway. She visualized it in detail, the model, the color, everything about it, and just with confidence day after day. Well, unfortunately, her business didn't improve. And time went on, and finally the business collapsed. She had to go out of business, and she had to sell her house and move into an apartment. And a few weeks after moving, she went back to the house to carry on some business with the new owners. You're laughing. Yeah. Guess what was in the driveway? That exact model, that exact color that she had been visualizing and affirming all of those weeks. Now, you tell me these teachings don't work. The science of yoga has really a lot to tell us about how to achieve our spiritual and material goals. And things like affirmation and visualization, these things are just the very beginning. And yoga teaches on a deeper level, first of all, that because man is in essence a divine being, a soul, a divine being, even to ask that question, how can I get this, or how can I succeed in that, the very act of putting our attention on that question initiates a dialogue between us and many, many unseen cosmic forces that are active in creation. There's a whole literature around this, the laws of success, the laws of prosperity. And these books and these lessons, these teachings are available for us should we need them. And through studying them, we learn. We learn how to activate these astral forces of karma and magnetism and the law of attraction, the laws of visualization, intention and affirmation, goal setting and time management, which ultimately will bring into manifestation the goals that we're setting. And this is all well and good. It's fine. It's wonderful. It's very useful. It's very practical. But there comes a point in the evolution of every soul where that soul begins to realize, makes a very interesting discovery, that there are no material goals, there are only spiritual goals. There are only spiritual goals. And you read any of these books of Guruji, eventually, after the first chapter or two or so on, it always comes back to that point. There are only spiritual goals because, as Master said, you think you want prosperity and human love, but behind these, it is your Father who is calling you. And he said, you will cry out in loneliness again and again until you realize that God is all in all, the only reality in the universe. You will cry out in loneliness again and again until you realize that God is the all in all, the only reality in the universe. Does that seem a bit harsh? Does it seem a bit extreme? Now, Guruji quoted that saint in Autobiography of a Yogi. He says, worldly people do not like the candor that shatters their delusions. But you're not worldly people. You're different. Worldly people are those who think they have material goals. Now, this brings us to a very interesting point. This well-known Zen story that I'm sure all of us have heard many times, where the student asked his master, "What did you do before you attained enlightenment?" And the answer was, "Chop wood and carry water." And then the student said, "And what do you do now, since you have achieved enlightenment?" "Chop wood, carry water." You know, the point is, the spiritual person, the one who is manifesting spiritual consciousness in daily life, does all the same things that a materially inclined person does, but with a whole different state of consciousness. Isn't it? That, you know, we talked about this power of human intention and power of human will that automatically initiates a dialogue with those cosmic astral forces for manifesting what we desire, what desires we're holding in our hearts. The spiritual person is no longer having the dialogue with the cosmic forces, but with the Lord of those cosmic forces. Our beloved late President Sri Dayamata was present one time when Guruji was talking about this and wrote down these words that have come to us through her efforts and her conscientiousness in sharing it all with us. Guruji said, "Although I am planning and doing things in the world, it is only to please the Lord. I test myself. Even when I am working, I whisper within, 'Where are you, Lord?' And the whole world changes. There is nothing but a great light, and I am a little bubble in that ocean of light. Such is the joy of existence in God." This gives us a whole new perspective, doesn't it? And, you know, there's this common question we ask ourselves, especially when we're younger people. This was my experience anyway. We're trying to plan our lives, and we ask, you know, is it better to do what one loves when it comes to career, or is it better to love what one does? Sound familiar question? Well, here in this group, here in Convocation, we have probably people of every conceivable occupation and profession and background and education level. And I think if we could take the collective wisdom of all of the souls here at the Convocation and pour it into one big pot, the essence of that collected wisdom would be very simply that really what one does is not so very important. It's not so very important. There comes a point in spiritual evolution where one occupation is pretty much the same as any other in terms of the fulfillment that it brings, in terms of the inner satisfaction that it brings. So the real key, the real goal that we need to focus on is not success or achievement in a given occupation, but success in tuning the heart, tuning the nervous system, tuning the consciousness to be sensitively aware, to be aware at all times of that love and joy that permeates creation. To be that kind of person is a successful life. In other words, we could say the goal is not to achieve something, but to become someone. Changing a concept of who you are. Who do you identify yourself with? Guruji said, the true state of the soul, the self, is bliss, wisdom, love, peace. It is to be so happy that no matter what you are doing, you enjoy it. Isn't that much better than to blunder through the world like a restless demon, unable to find satisfaction in anything? It's the concept of changing who we identify ourselves as being. And it's really interesting to watch modern science catch up with ancient yoga. And psychologists have been now proving that this very point, that the identities that we adopt, along with their preconceptions and about what, a certain identity, a certain type of personality can and cannot achieve, that these have a strong impact in a positive way and in a negative way on what we can accomplish in life. This write-up about some recent research was sent to me by an SRF member who teaches graduate school in business at one of the large universities. And it relates that in a recent experiment, psychologists enlisted a group of college students, all were Asian American women, to take a math test. And the students were asked a set of questions about themselves before being given the math questions. And they were just randomly divided in half. The first half were given questions like, what do you think of co-ed dorms? And other questions that were designed to focus their attention on, I'm a woman. And then the other half were given questions such as, what languages do you know? What languages do your parents and grandparents speak? In other words, they were being made to feel, I'm Asian. And then they both were given the math questions. Now, it's very interesting how they performed on the test. The second group that were made to feel their identification with their Asian background scored a much higher result than the first group. And of course, American society, maybe other societies as well, have these stereotypes. They're very limiting stereotypes that says that basically males are held to be better at math than females. And also that Asians have this popular stereotype, are better at math and science. So by having them concentrate on one or the other of those two identities, they were able to measure how it has a huge impact on what they're able to achieve. It really goes to show how much we need to ask ourselves, in what ways am I limiting myself? By when people tell me, oh, you can't do that, or, you're not good at that, or because of this or because of that. This research is just a little thing. It's just on a small level, but imagine what we could do in our lives if we apply it on the highest level. Listen to these words, very powerful statement from our Guru. He said, as a man thinketh, so is he. Whatever way the devotee thinks of himself, free or in bondage, attached or non-attached, restless with passion or free of all desire, that is the consciousness the body-identified soul adopts. If a devotee practices sadhana with the firm resolve that he will be free in this lifetime, can there be another world for him after death? No. Merging in spirit, there is no death for him. He becomes the ever-living, everywhere present. Pursue your path to knowledge fearlessly. Destroy all obstacles. Think of yourself, little self, as the self, capital S. A devotee shared a story about one time when Guruji was visiting some disciples in Phoenix. And she was fortunate to be present on that occasion. Probably this was in the late 1940s. And Master was visiting at the home of his hosts, and as they talked and discussed different things, their little 2.5-year-old granddaughter came into the room. And the devotee who told us this said, well, she was this tiny little thing with golden hair, and she was just silently walking around the dining room looking at everybody. And she was just drawn by the magnetism that Master was exuding. And so she pulled up a chair over by him and climbed up on the chair and just looked at him. And then, trying to get his attention, she started putting her little fingers through the hair on his shoulder. In the 1940s, it was very rare for a man to have that kind of long hair. And he didn't give, at that time, any indication of being disturbed or bothered by it. They went on talking to the devotees, and then finally the little girl, she bent around and looked right in his face and said, "What are you? A man or a woman?" And Master just said, "Neither," and went on talking with his. As he said, when you go beyond the consciousness of this world, knowing that you are not the body, you are not the mind, and yet aware as never before that you exist, that divine consciousness is what you are. You are that in which is rooted everything in the universe. And he said, God's image is within you. He can do anything, and so can you, if you learn to identify yourself with His inexhaustible nature. So how to do it? It seems that these days many devotees are showing a special interest in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So let's talk about Patanjali. This whole science of yoga is the answer of how to do it. Last time I talked at Convocation, I was assigned to speak on the very beginning of the Eightfold Path of Patanjali, the Yama and Niyama. And this time the topic that I'm assigned to give takes us completely to the other end, the final steps. And I think you all know that Patanjali, that ancient rishi of yoga, set out this Eightfold Path that was Yama and Niyama, the moral rules of behavior, the do's and don'ts. Then comes asana, or right posture for meditation. Then pranayama, life force control. Pratyahara, the interiorization of the consciousness. And then the last three steps, dharana, concentration, dhyana, meaning meditation, and culminating in samadhi, or oneness with spirit, oneness with God. And these last three, dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, and samadhi, Patanjali grouped these all together into one term, and the term is samyama. Samyama. This, we're going to talk about, this is the most powerful tool ever discovered for achieving success in either material goals, spiritual goals, any kind of goals, because it transforms our sense of identity. It transforms our sense of who we are into a divine being. So these are the three verses where Patanjali talks about that. He says, dharana is concentration or fixity on an inner conception or object of meditation. Just listen to these as I'm reading them. And I should mention too that in the new CD of Mrinalini Mata about the yoga sadhana, she talks very beautifully about these. So for now, just listen to these. Dharana is concentration or fixity on an inner conception or object of meditation. A steady, continuous flow of attention directed toward that object is meditation, dhyana. When the object of meditation engulfs the meditator so that they become one, this is samadhi. These three together, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, constitute samyama. Now, it may sound abstruse and philosophical with all the Sanskrit words, but essentially the law that he's outlining here is a very simple and a very powerful one. We become what we concentrate on. We become what we concentrate on. And it's impossible to overestimate the importance of this in achieving one's goals. Again, you remember in the eightfold practice of yoga, you do your techniques, you do your pranayama techniques, kriya yoga if you have it. Then after the techniques comes that time of interiorization, that time of mental calmness, of stillness. And in that stillness, that's where you begin to activate, that's where you begin to apply this tool of samyama. One way, for instance, of doing it is that I found personally very inspiring and very helpful and very wonderful is really the only word for it, is You get to that point in meditation and go back then just to the opening prayer. To the opening prayer, Father, Mother, Friend, Beloved. Father, Mother, Friend, Beloved. You know, that flowing, that fixity of concentration on each of those relationships, that flowing of attention into that relationship and then feeling the reciprocal flowing back of that beautiful, beautiful, sustaining spiritual consciousness that's embodied in each of those divine relationships. You can go on, you can go, there's no limit to how deep one can go with that. Just with those few simple concepts: Father, Mother, Friend, Beloved God. That great saint, Teresa of Lisieux, said one time that she used to spend hours on just the first two words of the Lord's Prayer, Our Father. And she would get so lost, so absorbed, so intoxicated with that consciousness that hours would go by. Or a similar way, again, in this time of stillness, in this time where you've done the techniques and it's time to practice those higher culminating steps of the yoga process, samyama. Do samyama on the gurus. You know, similar thing. You start and you visualize each one and you just invoke them. Jesus, Krishna, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, Sri Yukteswarji, Gurudev, Jesus, Krishna, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, Sri Yukteswarji, Paramahansaji, Gurudev. You know, spending as long as you feel engaged, and you have to work it. You have to apply this. Again, all three of them come into play. First, that fixity of attention, and then that flow, constant flow of attention, until you begin to feel that concept or that relationship or that object of our meditation. It engulfs the meditator. It engulfs the meditator. You know, when we think of these things, we hear terms like samadhi and so on like that, and we think, well, you know, maybe in some distant lifetime I will be blessed to have those kinds of experiences. Well, it's true. It is an incredibly lofty experience, that ultimate oneness with God. But even in the state of meditation where each of us is right now, we can begin to glimpse that. We can begin to taste that if we apply this tool of samyama. Remember, we become what we concentrate on. So even that exercise of putting that samyama attention on each of the gurus, it transforms our life. It allows us to imbibe that consciousness, the qualities, the love, the gifts that each of those great ones wants to bestow on us. You know, by the way, in case you haven't guessed, this is the technique by which only 1/1,000,000th of Master's teachings can take us to God. You know, if you have that depth, if we achieve that probing willingness to spend the time to go deep into that, to let that flow, that reciprocal flow start to occur between us and whatever concept of God we are meditating on. Now, this can also be applied in outer activity. You know, we think of the 8 steps of Patanjali when we get to these exalted levels, that it's all about these deep states of meditation. No, it isn't. It's also applied in outer activity. Service is a form of samyama. Really in 2 ways. First, I would say, because anything that we are actively engaging our energy and attention on, we're focusing in a very complete way on an ideal or a person. That concentration transforms us in the same process. It transforms us into the object that we are serving and that we are concentrating on by virtue of serving. That's the whole idea, the whole concept behind this beautiful concept of Guru Seva, service to the Guru. And it also works in a different way, is that as we serve, we're literally giving ourselves away, our old selves, our little selves, we're giving them away. Again, changing our sense of identity. I've seen this in so many of Guruji's disciples. Sri Dayamata, of course, she, for years and decades, long before I came on the path, she was utmost example of that divine consciousness, that divine love, that divine compassion. But in the final months and weeks of her life, she passed away, as you all know, in 2010. And a very interesting thing happened, even physically. It was as though her physical form was dissolving away. It was just becoming transparent. And I had the good fortune to see her once or twice during that time, and each time it was as though there's this window with a bright sunshine coming through, and it's covered with a shade or dust or whatever, and each time it became a little clearer. The transparency became a little bit greater. It literally consumed her, and it was deeply, deeply inspiring. Another one that I had good fortune to witness this in was Brother Mokshananda. He actually was the last disciple to come into the ashram during Guruji's lifetime, just a few days before Master's Mahasamadhi. And he's the one maybe you remember reading about when he arrived and Guruji welcomed him by saying, "Loyalty is the highest law." And he was saying that not in the sense of, giving him a lecture, you better remember, loyalty is the highest law. It was, your loyalty has brought you to me just in time. The loyalty, that relationship that we have had, the magnetism, the power of that. And he was basically saying, good job, you got here. Well, when Brother Mokshananda was in his final terminal illness and was staying at the Mother Center, I was just a young monk then, and a few of us young monks were assigned to look after him and take care of him just physically, in between the doctor visits. There really wasn't any more medical treatment that could be done, and it was just a matter of caring for him. And one day, actually it was Christmas Day, this was 1981, Christmas Day. I happened to be the one on duty there, and the phone rang, and the message said, Dayamata wants you to bring Brother Mokshananda upstairs because it's Christmas. She wants to greet him. The other directors want to wish him a Merry Christmas. So we took him in his wheelchair up to the 3rd floor. He went in the elevator, came out at in the middle of the building there on the 3rd floor, and wheeled him out into the hall. And this image is so vivid in my mind, even now 30 years later, where we came out into the hall, and I looked down, and Dayamata was walking towards us. And I could see that it was her, but it was a little bit difficult, I'll be honest, because it was more like this huge ball of light and love, literally love, was just rolling down the hall. And she got up to Brother Mokshananda's wheelchair, and she talked with him for a few minutes, and it was the most powerful expression of the Guru's presence and love that I had at that time. She and then said, "We'll bring him into the middle room there, where the other directors had gathered, gave him some Christmas gifts, and then Ma began to talk." And Brother Nandamoy was also there, and he wrote about it. Actually, he talked about it, and it was printed in the magazine after Brother Mokshananda's passing. And he put it this way. He said, "I wish I could describe to you the feeling in that room. The presence of Master was so strong. It was so strong. And all I remembered, because I didn't know, he was with Master, he's one of the disciples who spent a lot of time around him. He could say that. All I knew was that Dayamata was saying these things. I couldn't to this day repeat even a word probably of what she said because it literally didn't matter. It was just the incredible, incredible love that she was pouring out there in that room. Tears were streaming down his face, down really all of our faces. And here's the point that I'm coming to with this, is that he was so touched and so overwhelmed, and he just looked at her, and in the midst of his tears, and said, "I wish I had something to give to you." Sweet. And then just almost as one voice, all of them, there were 4 or 5 of the other directors, all of them as one voice said, "You have already given everything." Now, see how this applies to what we've been talking about. This idea of we become what we concentrate on. It literally transforms our identity. It transforms who we are at the deepest level. And that Samyama, of course, he had years of Kriya meditation. He had years of serving his body and mind and heart and soul, his guru's work. And he had that loyalty. All 3 of them together, in one way or the other, put into effect this principle of Samyama. We become what we concentrate on. And you see in those final days, those final weeks of his life, it literally transformed him. There's other end-of-life stories. Probably many of you have known or witnessed this. Beautiful, beautiful end-of-life stories of devotees who may not even think that they have made much progress in their life. They outwardly still seem pretty much not so different than the ordinary person. But then when that cumulative effect comes, and you see how far we have come, how deeply they've been transformed, that's Samyama. Now, going on just a little bit further with Patanjali, the next verse, he says, "From mastery of Samyama comes the light of awareness and insight." A Sanskrit word, pragya, awareness and insight. Obviously, very important in achieving success in any kind of field, spiritual or material. That is pragya. Now, as I said, it's not important that we remember or even understand or even know how to pronounce these Sanskrit words. This word pragya has a very simple translation, a very simple expression in everyday life, and that is right attitude. Right attitude. One of the 3 foundations, one of the 3 cornerstones of sadhana that we've been talking about: meditation, right activity or service, and right attitude. That is sadhana. Now, right attitude, of course, this is a huge, huge subject in itself. We really need to have a whole class just on that. I'm sure we will at some point. But I'm bringing it up now because, number one, it's so important in this idea of transforming our sense of identity, transforming us and achieving our goals. It's so important that just even to know, and you can take this home and practice it, just even to know that this tool of samyama also can transform our attitudes. It also can unfold or energize the seeds of those right attitudes, those seeds of those spiritual qualities. Again, it's very similar. You can take in meditation, take some aspect of right attitude, and again, you start and you concentrate on it, like humility, or loving kindness, or devotion. And you just repeat those. You repeat even just that one word. That's the first part, the concentration. And then what? Then what? In that silence, you listen. You listen and you let that deepening concentration unfold into that flow of attention which goes both directions between God and Guru and our souls. Even just to do samyama on these three, humility, loving kindness, and devotion. I picked those three because it's the right attitude first towards ourselves, humility, the right attitude towards others, loving kindness, and the right attitude toward God and Guru, devotion. And in the end, that kind of practice, that kind of concentration, that kind of samyama, that will give you more than any amount of lecture, any amount of reading, any amount of book learning, because you're getting it direct. You're getting it direct from your soul and from the Guru. And that's how you put it into practice in daily life. Another way of applying this idea of samyama to right attitude is do samyama, do that concentration on role models. You know, reflect on their lives of the saints and the masters and the gurus. Because by doing so, remember, what are we doing? We become what we concentrate on. Make that identity your identity. And for me, I think maybe for a lot of us, Paramahansa Yogananda is the very embodiment of right attitude. He embodied this hymn to right attitude that was written by Kipling. You remember the famous poem, you know, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you have spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you've given your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a Yogananda, my son. I changed that last line, but every line in that poem expressed and played out in his life in one way or another. This is what we talk about of concentrating on role models, and that statement of right attitude in all situations. You know, one of the parts of sadhana that we're encouraged to take up is reverent study of the scriptures. Master's life is a scripture. And as the years go by, more and more people will see it as such. So just to close, Guruji said, when you came into this world, you cried and everybody else smiled. You should so live your life that when you leave, everyone else will cry, but you will be smiling. You know, at these convocations and in all of his teachings, all of his dispensation to the world, our Guru was not interested at all in just conveying information. And at convocation, you know, all of us try very much to focus on, yes, the understanding and the practical tools, but there's so much more to that, is that all of us come together to feel beyond the information, beyond the tools, the transmission of his consciousness. The transmission of his consciousness. You know, if it was just information, you could find it all on the internet. But that presence, that transforming, special, ethereal something that we feel in these gatherings of satsang, this comes from having a living Guru. So throughout this week, and whenever you attune yourself with him in deep meditation, devotion, interiorized, that transmission is taking place, filling your life, filling your consciousness, transforming you. And that's how we tune our minds and our nervous systems so that we can live in this world aware of that great ocean of joy, that great ocean of love in all creation, where we come to the point where we can say with Guruji, while small-minded men cry impossible, the pathfinders of the world calmly pursue their goals and demonstrate that the impossible was instead inevitable. And we'll say with the mystics, praise for everything, praise for it all. Jai Guru.